We'll kick off. Right. Thank you for coming to today's webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about why it's important to upgrade to Umbraco version 10. So anyone specifically running Umbraco websites, I can see by the attendee list, there's people we know here, clients and so on that, are running Umbraco and running maybe more legacy versions. This is obviously very important to you guys, as well as some new faces here that may also be running Umbraco. So today's hosts, myself, Paul End, and I am the Managing Director of Fuelius. And then we have my co-host today, Sean.
Yeah, so I'm Sean Oldfield. I'm the Head of Engineering here at Fuelius. I've been here for numerous years now, and my background is in development. So I've worked heavily with Umbraco over the last 10 or so years.
Brilliant. Version 2 or something, your first?
Version 2 is the first one, yeah.
Version. We're now approaching version 11 next year. Any questions throughout the webinar today, feel free to pop them in the chat and the Q&A. We have Meg on our side, who's also going to sort of be facilitating that and sort of popping those questions over to us. So let's keep it really conversational if we can. And sort of what we're going to be going through today. So we won't make this massively about Fuelius. We'll spend a minute or two just talking about Fuelius as a brand, who we are, what we do, give you an understanding of sort of the format for today's session. And as I say, please use that chat, pop some questions in if you have them. We'll focus on the main topic today, why it's important for you as a business that you should upgrade to Umbraco version 10. And then any Q&As. I think we've had a few already actually in the Q&A, which we'll answer. So stick around to the end if you can. So as an agency, we're actually 25 years old next year. And we've been working with Umbraco now for over 10 of those years. And as Sean mentioned, Umbraco version 2 was our first sort of dabble into the Umbraco ecosystem, approaching version 11 next year. And, it's something that we regularly review to sort of ascertain, is Umbraco still the right platform for us? And it definitely is. And it's a platform that we will continue to grow into and continue to do more and more with. Work with a vast sort of range of clients, really, everything from professional services through to manufacturing, automotive, leisure and tourism, NHS, central government. There's not really a use case that it doesn't fit for Umbraco, as you can see from the sort of the grid there on screen. And I guess finally, last little bit about us, we are what's classed as an Umbraco Gold partner, which is the highest level of partner you can actually be in the Umbraco space. We're one of the first Umbraco partners in UK, Europe, and the world, given how long we've actually worked with the platform. So, all of our developers fully certified and sort of fully bought into the platform. After this, we'll share sort of an email with some links. One of the things we will share is our Fuelius Video Hub. All of these events that we do are sort of recorded and saved there. We have, marketing specific events, web specific events. We have sort of more topical stuff. We have HubSpot deep dives, Umbraco deep dives, and so on. So we'll share that with you all, and you can sort of watch any on-demand content that you may choose to. So on to today's topic, why you need to upgrade to Umbraco version 10. So I think, Umbraco version 7 reaches end of life next year, doesn't it?
Yep, September
next year, 2023. So we'll talk a bit about what sort of end of life means.
Yeah, sure. So effectively, end of life is the last point in which Umbraco maintains or supports a version of Umbraco. So that's in terms of support in terms of bugs, as well as security issues. So as mentioned there, no longer all maintain features and no releases for fix or bugs, regressions. So what that means is that at that stage, the underlying Umbraco product is at risk of security breaches and performance issues. I
think it's an interesting one, because I had this conversation with a client a couple of months back now about what that actually means. And it doesn't mean your website will stop working. It doesn't mean your website will 404 and you can't access it ever again. It doesn't mean you're going to come in on September the whatever date it was and your website's going to have been hacked. But what it does mean is that it introduces risk. And if we consider security as an example, it means that Umbraco are no longer proactively looking for sort of security holes and vulnerabilities. And it means that ultimately any security patching has to become reactive. And ultimately there's two types of ways that an Umbraco agency would discover those needs to reactively patch. One is an update, something comes out in the community and some unfortunate business has found out that there's a vulnerability and it's been circulated through the community, and we react accordingly and we patch it. The slightly less nice version of that is you are that unfortunate business, and it's your website that has that vulnerability. Now, obviously, from a hosting perspective, from a sort of architecture perspective, there's loads of stuff we put in place to mitigate that where we can. But ultimately, you're sort of only as strong as your weakest link. And if you're now on a version of Umbraco, or from September next year, if you're on a version of Umbraco that isn't being proactively monitored and therefore proactively patched, there is a higher likelihood that that vulnerability could happen, and it could happen to you. It might be worth talking. It took us a little while. There's a couple of slides here around end-of-life dates and the new sort of cadence, but end-of-life dates, worth going through them?
Yeah, definitely. So as mentioned, Umbraco 7, which I know a lot of people are on at the moment, the end of life of that is September next year. That sounds like it's a long way away, but the preparation and the work that goes into that, looking at the system as a whole, it's not that long. It really does take a long time to understand the needs of the system and rework it. Umbraco 8 is end of life 2 years after that. So that is, I believe, just under 2 years after that. So February 2025. And the confusing one is Umbraco 9 is end of life December of this year. So we've got some slides further on in the presentation that goes a bit more in depth as to the new way Umbraco is releasing versions, which will obviously go in a bit more depth as that. It's a bit of an anomaly on that slide there.
I mentioned this before, ultimately it means that running an out-of-date version of Umbraco means that your CMS won't be as reliable and secure that you're used to. So I mentioned that security patching will no longer happen, but no longer will product enhancement. So, as version 7 and eventually version 8 and version 9 reach end of life, you won't receive sort of incremental updates that improve the editor experience within your CMS. It also means, as previously mentioned, that there literally will be no ongoing support. So in addition to the sort of patches not happening, we won't have the ability as an agency to reach out to Umbraco and say, hey, we could do with your assistance on fixing this in Umbraco 7, Umbraco 8, Umbraco 9. It's just not something that will happen. As an agency, for any of our customers, we'll obviously continue to support legacy versions of Umbraco, and we will continue to work on them. We'll be able to do security patching and so on, but as I mentioned, it will be in that reactive manner. So it is really quite important that anyone on a legacy version of Umbraco considers moving to the newer versions and benefits from a more graceful upgrade path, which we'll come on to shortly. Couple of stats here. 32% of businesses suffer a security or data breach every single week due to their CMS. Every 19 seconds, one small business in the UK is successfully hacked, and 65,000 attempts to hack small to medium businesses occur in the UK every single day. So, when people talk about hacking, I think you think of the Matrix, or you think of sort of various tech style films where people are pulling screens up wildly and clicking, putting a USB stick in and hacking the Pentagon in 3 seconds or whatever. It's not really like that. The majority of hacks come from vulnerabilities in platforms, and there's a lot of news that you see. I think WordPress gets a lot of that press because A, it's so vastly used, but B, it is quite a inherently insecure platform due to the sort of nature of plugins and themes that exist up on WordPress. Every couple of months, we tend to hear about how Revolution Slider, the most used plugin in WordPress, has developed not developed a sort of hole, but a hole has been identified, and as a result, 6.5 million websites are now at risk. Umbraco definitely sits more in that sort of mid-market enterprise space, doesn't it? And obviously backed by it's built upon .NET, the Microsoft framework, and as a result, it's a far more resilient and secure platform anyway. But it doesn't mean it's invincible. And no businesses either. I think sometimes businesses can assume that, oh, because we're not Microsoft, we're probably safe. But we see regularly, we see activity where people are trying to DDoS servers and just for fun in some cases, and as a result, that could promote insecurity in a website. So these figures look a bit scaremongery, but I think the key here is to not think that because you're maybe running Umbraco, you're invincible, or because your business isn't a colossal business that some rogue hacker would target, you're safe, because ultimately it could happen to any website. And the ICO, when sort of GDPR was rolled out, the thing to consider about a data breach or a vulnerability in a website is if your website has a vulnerability and that vulnerability is exploited, and the person who is exploiting that website gains access to your website, they likely gain access to customer data. And that customer data, that is a data breach by GDPR definitions and any data regulation definitions. That is a data breach. Now, the typical fine for a data breach is 4% of global turnover. So, you may be a business that you're working within the UK subsidiary or the UK department of a global business or whatever it may be. That fine isn't just isolated to your function, your team. It is a global fine. The average fine for a data breach, the average costs for a data breach are around £4 million for UK enterprises. I imagine they'll be somewhat smaller for sort of SMEs and mid-market companies, but a data breach is a lot of work. There's a lot of, you have to inform the regulators, you have to inform customers, you have to go through a whole series of process to ensure that A, doesn't happen again. You investigate the cause and follow the sort of ICO steps. But on top of the costs that are indicated on this slide, there is a 4% global turnover fine minimum that can be applied by the ICO in the event of a data breach. Where that money goes, reputational damage is a big thing. I don't know if anyone watching this, and yourself, Sean, you hear regularly now of EasyJet. I think had something last year. I'll probably still fly with them, but EasyJet had something last year. I think Vodafone or someone, or Phones for You or something. Probably shouldn't just guess companies, to be honest. But large companies sort of have. I think there was one of the online greetings cards companies last year had one where customer data was sort of accidentally shared. I use fairly strong password, I would say, for my account and my personal things, but every now and again I'll type it in and I'll get a notification from like Windows saying this password has been used somewhere else. And that's ultimately because a website that I've used that password on has been breached and probably stored in plain text or something somewhere. And now my information is available on the internet. So, a big thing there. Downtime as well. It's not something that, there was the NHS issue 4 or 5 years ago with the malware that was sort of injected onto an NHS environment. And from what I remember, it was
the ransomware, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a while though, wasn't it? It was, best part of a week where NHS systems were down. Consider that in a commercial organization, your organization, if your tech systems were down, if your website was down, what would the cost be? What would the impact be on your business? And the fines and legal fees you mentioned earlier. So taking it back to Umbraco, what's next for Umbraco? I think I'll leave you to talk through this because it did admittedly take us, we've had this information for a long time and it's taken us a while to get through this. So probably worth you running through it.
I can take this on. So a bit of background onto Umbraco versioning, just before we get on to the main bulk of the work, is it's split. It uses semantic versioning. So that's split into major releases, minor releases, and patch releases. So major releases would be version 7, version 8, version 9, version 10. So they're large breaking changes within the Umbraco, the underlying Umbraco technology. That could be the rework of the underlying framework, as in the case with V9, V10, or adding large new features that will need considerable rework to get them to work effectively for your website moving forward. Minor, where new features are added to a major version. So that could be a new property header in the CMS, a new section in the CMS, maybe some additions to forms along those lines, but they're always backwards compatible. So it means that if we upgrade to a minor, there'll be some changes maybe needed, but on the most part, it'll be fine and it'll work as expected. And patch are in the cases where bugs are identified or there's a security issue, a patch will fix that. And it's normally backwards compatible over the last, I think, 3 minors or 4 minors, okay. But it's the best way of releasing that. So it's normally a smaller release.
And dumbing that down for me a little bit, is it safe to say that if we used an example of version 10 as a major, 10.1 is likely a minor, 10.1.1 maybe a patch?
Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah.
Okay. So in terms of the release cadence then, so how often will they come out?
So the majors, previously, majors were taking 4 years to come out, which has obviously caused a lot of problems with upgrade paths. But now the Umbraco have taken a more streamlined approach. So majors will be released twice a year. So every 6 months.
Okay.
And there'll be 2 versions that will come out, 2 versions of majors. So there'll be long-term supported and short-term supported, which we'll touch on in a bit. So yeah, the minor versions, that's every 6 weeks. So the 10.5, 0.6, 0.7. So that's the new features that get added to the CMS, any improvements on speed, little bits like that get added throughout the year, every 6 weeks, and patch versions as and when needed. Okay. So as soon as a bug is identified, we'll be contacted, patch get ready, and they'll release it as soon as possible.
Yeah, fine. And then there's a nice image here to sort of define that a little bit further.
So I touched on there's 2 versions of majors, so long-term support and short-term support. So in this diagram, the short-term support are obviously the shorter bars and the long-term are the longer bars. So version 10 is a long-term. So effectively what that means is it's a stable version where they've put in the core features and they're not going to add any major features to that version. So it'll be supported for over 3 years. That's up to 3 years, I believe.
Okay.
And the active development cycle, so when they're actively working on it as the main version is 6 months, then it moves into a support phase, which is where any bugs are identified, any features that may not work as intended, they'll be worked on, perhaps released.
Right.
And then we go into the security phase where if any security critical issues are found with the system, that's when they'll be looked at. So I think that's a 9-month period on the end of that as well. I can check the exact ones on that 1 second. Yeah, so support phase, yeah, it's 9 months, and then long term is 24 months.
Okay. So in regards to sort of the upgrade paths thereafter, is it safe to say that once you upgrade to those sort of newer versions, it becomes simpler to upgrade?
Yeah, so I think I alluded to it before. Previously, Umbraco worked on version, when version 7 was the active version. Yeah. Version 8 was always being built in the background, and they were lining it up for a full change across the system. Yeah. So it was, at that phase, there was no direct upgrade path. It was always like we'd have to rebuild it to get it up to the next version, which is not ideal. But with this new cadence, with the continually iterating, it's not big changes every 4 years. It's incremental changes that add up to that greater change over a longer period of time.
Yeah, and I think we come on to this in a slide in a minute, and I'm jumping the gun a little bit. But ultimately, once you're on version 9 or above, I keep describing the upgrade path from then as almost like when a car gets an over-the-air update. It's not quite as simple as that, but it's, you know, once you're on version 9, to upgrade to 10, 11, 12, 13, and all the incremental points between is very minor effort. It's 2 or 3 hours at a time to benefit from those major upgrade paths. Whereas anyone who's on an older version of Umbraco may have seen that moving from 4 to 5, 5 to 6, 6 to 7, 7 to 8, and so on, has been almost the same cost as rebuilding a website. Yeah. Once you're on Umbraco 9 or Umbraco 10, which is what we would do now, you know, you're talking 2 or 3 hours work to move into those major upgrades. So it's much better. And I think that's why we'll come on to the fact that version 9 has that short end of life period because of the new upgrade path. So slide here on what's different with Umbraco 10. What's so good about Umbraco 10?
Yeah. So the main bonus really effect is the performance.
Yeah.
Is the underlying technology. I may go a bit too techy, a bit nerdy. The framework that it's built on top of is being considerably overhauled by Microsoft.
Yeah.
So the benchmark test of like how quickly a site boots up, how quickly does it become responsive to a user on the website, that's been dramatically reduced.
Yeah.
That is the biggest and the main contributing factor to why they've rolled into this release cadence, because they can keep that performance up as Microsoft releases their new versions. And
I guess that ultimately means better performance equals a better, faster loading website ultimately for the end user, which obviously has SEO benefits, has general customer experience benefits. But for websites that have larger traffic, obviously we do a lot of work in the leisure and tourism space. We work with a number of like music arenas and so on. Emirates Old Trafford in Manchester being one of them. M&S Bank Arena in Liverpool being another. You can have fairly standard web traffic, and then you can announce Harry Styles or you can announce Lewis Capaldi, and you have a very heightened level of traffic. Newer versions of Umbraco equal better performance of that sort of stuff too.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, the traffic management, as you say, of the new framework is by far much better than what it used to be.
Yeah,
it allows much more concurrent users on the site without any degrading in the performance of the website.
Brilliant. And as mentioned, it is one of these major versions. So once you're on Umbraco version 10, you are supported until 2025. But furthermore, you're supported thereafter as well, because the upgrade path to 11 is
when you get to the end of that period, it's not the end of that version. We don't have to go to a full rebuild. It's an incremental upgrade. It's not
every 3-year slot. You never get into the end of that 3-year period, because you're probably doing up to 6 majors in that same time period, each one benefiting from 3 years of support. So it's it's about upgrading now for those performance reasons, but it also gives that longevity and sort of sustainability with your web platform. So depending on your current version, there's a couple of options, isn't there?
Yeah. So version 7 and version 8 are pretty much in the same sort of camp. Okay. Those two, obviously version 7 is closing into end of life next year, so it's more of a priority. Version 8 a bit into the future, but the way we just actually tackle it is the same. It is a rebuild, because as I mentioned, underlying technology that it's built on has changed. So the front end code that we put in place will no longer work on the new site. So in that case, we go back to the drawing board. Possibly, if we're going to go for that, we'd look at other options, how to better improve your site, and then we'd go through the full build process again. Whereas version 9, as Paul mentioned earlier, it's on the new release cycle. So it's a minor upgrade effectively for us in terms of effort. It's 3 hours, up to a day tops. It's not a big amount of effort as it used to be.
Yeah, definitely. And just for clarity here, there are prior versions to version 7 as well. So version 6, for example, we're way into end of life there.
Yeah, that's been end of life for a while now,
and anyone on version 6 or prior, I think we had our first first in a while, our first version 2 upgrade recently, didn't we?
That was fun.
You're already end of life. You're already in a situation where security patches aren't happening, and you are ultimately slightly higher risk, I would say. And as a result, if you are pre-version 6, it's worth having that conversation now around that upgrade to version 10. So in terms of how we help with the upgrade process, as we mentioned, we're an Umbraco Gold partner. There are multiple options depending on the version you're on. In some cases, depending on how the site's been built, and I mean that in terms of sometimes we will have companies come to us who've had an Umbraco website built by another Umbraco agency in the past, and it's been built slightly differently to how we would have, and the upgrade path not necessarily as nice as it should be. Then there's a couple of different options. One may be there is a level of lift and shift availability in terms of it being quite low cost to upgrade and get you on that sort of path, but you end up with a website that looks exactly the same, if there are any sort of front end bugs or anything, they'll come with it. Any functionality that is maybe not quite up to scratch with what you'd want it to be in this day and age will also come with it. Or there's the option of going through the process and sort of benefiting from the efficiency of scale of doing the upgrade and doing that rebuild at the same time. So, it doesn't feel, in my opinion, worth paying an agency to go through that upgrade process from 7 to, or from 6 or 7 to 10, and then in a year looking at a rebuild when there's a large economy of scale in terms of doing it all at once. We can also help with code audits. So if you are in a position where you've maybe built an in-house Umbraco website, or you've had a different agency build you an Umbraco website, and you just want a bit of a fresh set of eyes on it to have a look at the platform and sort of understand how it's been built and give you options, we can do that for you. Right, so on to Q&As. I can see a few coming through. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and move to the camera view and go into those Q&As. Okay, so we have, one second, number of questions here. So we have one. Can I clarify, once version 9 and above are in situ, the website won't need a complete rebuild, like the situation we would be facing now being on version 7? That is correct. So once you're on version 9, so let's take that exact scenario. You're on version 7 at present. There is a need for you to ultimately rebuild. Now, in that scenario, we would rebuild on version 10. Anything from 9 and above puts you on that graceful
Yeah.
upgrade path. So once you're on 9, 10, you do not have to do that again. You would move to 11 in 6 months, and we'd handle that in a 1-2 hour piece of work when that's out. You'd move to 12 6 months later in another 1 or 2 hour piece of work to just perform those upgrades. So yeah, once you're on version 9, 10 or above, you do not have to go through that rebuild process again, unless there's a business reason you'd want to. Other questions. Question from George. How long will the upgrade process take? So it really depends on the site, doesn't it? It really depends which sort of version of Umbraco you're on. And if you are looking to keep things sort of as they are and just sort of upgrade the underlying code, or you're looking to go through that rebuild process. So, it could really be anywhere from 6 to, well, the sky's the limit in terms of if you're doing a full rebuild, but 6 weeks probably as a minimum, because it's unfortunately not as simple as logging in and pressing a button, is it?
I think you touched on earlier, that consultancy piece as well. We look at the current build and what you want to achieve with the next build. That really influences how long it's going to take and what effort needs to go into it, really. Yeah.
I mean, for context, we've done a fair few recently. There's one particular organization we did one for, which was keep everything the same and just take us from 6, was it?
Yeah.
6 to 9. And there was 3 websites being done, and it was, a 6-week process ultimately for 3 websites. So it can be fairly quick. But I must stress there's quite an economy of scale to, if you're looking to potentially redesign anyway or add new functionality anywhere or anything like that, there's quite an economy of scale that it may be worth sort of doing it all at once and considering a sort of a larger scale project. See if we have any more. We do. We have one from Amanda. I might pass this one to you, Sean. You may know the answer better than me. When will Umbraco version 11 be released?
So currently the release is scheduled for, I believe, next month. So there's a release candidate out at the moment, which is effectively a version that gets released early to developers to weed out any of the bugs.
Yeah.
Feedback to Umbraco HQ. Failing that, it'll be early January next year. Yeah. So it's imminent, effectively.
And to add to that, we're in a process right now of building numerous websites for clients on version 10. I don't want people to hear that and sort of be disheartened that the website that's being built right now is old. because it isn't. Version 10 is the current latest version.
And version 10 is the long-term supported version. So that's the stable version at the moment. That's got the core features that have been refined over version 9, and it's now been released as we're going to support this for 5 years. So
yes,
it's not version 11's out without update.
Yeah, of course. Well, that said, if you're an organization that is, I always think there's two types of organization when it comes to versioning. There's organizations that want to be at the forefront and be one of the first to upgrade every single time. And then you've got organizations who sort of use terminology as let everyone else find bugs first and we'll delay a little bit and upgrade a little bit later. If you are on version 10 and you go live next week with a version 10 website, the second version 11 comes out, you do have the ability, in collaboration with your agency or your devs or your IT team to upgrade to version 11. And given this new upgrade path, that upgrade is a 1 to 3 hour process. So it doesn't slow things down. Not sure if we have any more. We do actually. One from Jack. How much time would it add to redesign the website when upgrading? Is it worth doing at the same time? Is it worth doing at the same time? I think a short answer is yes, because when we embark on a web project, there's a lot of work required, isn't there, in sort of spinning up the environment, the underlying code base, all of that stuff. Stuff probably downplaying it, but all of that. And we're having to do that anyway for the larger upgrades. So there's a fair economy of scale. It's not really that simple to sort of say how much time it would add to redesign, because that would entirely depend on, does your website have 3 templates, 300 templates? Do you have login areas, payment gateways, back-end functionality? But what I would say in short is there is an economy of scale. I think we may be done from a Q&A perspective. Yep, we are. So unless there's any other Q&As from any of the attendees today, that will be us. Just checking. There's one more. Sorry, one from Kim. Is there any way to know what are the key differences between version 7 and 8 compared to version 10?
Yep. So on the Umbraco website themselves, they do have a blog which outlines every different change they make between versions. Mm-hmm. There is a more techie version as well, if you want to go really into the depths of, the specific libraries that may have been upgraded. But yeah, we can obviously put links out after this when we send the recording, just to give that area where Umbraco release it. So they have got a lot better in displaying that to clients effectively.
I think one of the big things I've seen as a non-developer is the editor experience, the back-end experience for the day-to-day content contributors, CMS editors, has become more and more akin to some of the more widely used CMSs, haven't it? It's become much more, it's nicer to use. I mean, the grid editor. Yeah.
So I think they've spent a lot of time on CMS editor experience, which you'll definitely see as soon as you move from the back end of a V6 site, for instance, to a V7, and it's been incremental since then. The grid editor is a great example of this. So previously, we had set templates in Umbraco. So the homepage, you had to put in specific bit of text here, specific bit of specific CTA here, and that was all you could do. Whereas now the grid editor gives a more modular, flexible approach to templates. So if we take the homepage, for instance, we could have a banner, a bit of intro text, and some CTAs. But if we then wanted to add a form onto that, we could then add it in via the grid editor and rearrange the content, copy the content, duplicate content. It's a lot more flexible.
And it sort of gives you the ability to, if you've got your 12 templates that have been built, you've got your service template, your product template, in a version 6 site, for example, you're fairly stuck with them, aren't you? Whereas moving to a grid editor means that if in a year after having your website built by an agency, if you need to develop a new template, you don't necessarily need to go to an agency. You can literally use those modules to drag and drop them into a new template, and and the sky's the limit, really. So
I think that's the same with new requirements as well. Previously, it was a case that you had to come back to the agency and say, I need a product template.
Yeah.
Whereas now we can piece it together most of the way, but it may just be a new module rather than an entire template. So there's cost savings there effectively.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Right. I think that is us. Meg has shared a number of sort of links and so on in the chat pane, including that Umbraco blog. I actually think we have another Q&A. One sec. How many iterations would you expect a version 7 upgrade to version 10 to be if only wishing to replicate existing sites and find organic enhancements through the upgrade experience? So I think what this is asking, and correct me if wrong, so to upgrade from version 7 to version 10, we don't need to go through 7, 7.1, 7.2.
No.
We can go straight from version 7 to version 10.
Yeah.
Although to caveat that, what I would say is with the new upgrade path moving forward, if you were to go to version 10 and wait for version 14, you would have to go 10, 11, 12, 13, 14.
Yeah, effectively, there are upgrade paths like that. We would need to go through each stage just to make sure that not any bugs, but make sure that it's fully functioning once you do the upgrade after that 2-3 hours, go through a full site check, do the next phase, do the next phase.
Yeah. So in short, Kim, a version 7 to version 10 upgrade can be done in terms of if you want to replicate existing and not go through that redesign process and that at the same time, relatively low effort in comparison to that rebuild. And yes, by doing that, you would find organic enhancements through the upgrade experience in terms of new back-end features and so on. Another slight caveat would be that if there are features built in the back end of Umbraco 10 that would have required sort of templates to be built around them in version 7, you may not get the full benefit of those things in version 10. Is that safe to say?
Sorry.
What I mean is, if you upgrade from version 7 to version 10, are you pretty much guaranteed to benefit from all the back-end features in version 10? Or are there some that you may not because the original site wasn't built around version 10?
I see what you mean. So say for templates, for instance.
Yeah.
So we would look at tweaking that. I think that's where like the redesign or the updates really come into their own, because we can really pull the most out of the available functionality that's been added.
Yeah.
Because there is the ability to rebuild exactly like for like, but you're not getting the full benefit of the system then at that point.
Yeah, I think Kim, an option from here would be to consider the sort of audit thing we mentioned, because we can sort of summarize as to it's quite low effort between 7 and 10 if we're keeping everything the same, but without sort of having a bit of a deep dive into your site, there might be a couple of intricacies that change that. So if you want to drop us an email afterwards, or we can reach out to you, maybe we can help with some preliminary, never say that word, preliminary sort of audits and stuff for you there. Cool. Right. I think we are done. So thank you very much for coming. Meg will share a sort of roundup of this. We will have this uploaded shortly if you want to watch it again. Any of the links we've shared, any useful resources and so on will also be shared. Thank you very much.